Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. These interviewed are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to past, present, and future legends, as well as business owners, employees, media, and land use warriors. Men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle we call off-road. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world that we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Have you seen 4Low magazine yet? 4Low magazine is a high-quality, well-written, four-wheel drive-focused magazine for the enthusiast market. If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, 4Low is the magazine for you. 4Low cannot be found in stores, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit 4lowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, I'll be talking with another land use warrior, a lady that is very well-spoken, cool-headed, and very knowledgeable on land use issues. I welcome Amy Granat.
Hello.
Hello, Amy. How are we doing today?
Oh, we're doing good. I'm just, I was looking at your recent podcast with Ivan Iron Man Stewart, who is a real legend. It's sort of boring in comparison, and, it's a little intimidating, I'd have to say.
Oh, don't be intimidated at all. It's just going to be a normal conversation. We're going to talk about you and what your life in off-road advocacy, so hard for me to say at the moment, is all about. And, we'll just go with it. I mean, there's not very many people out there that can compare with Ivan Stewart, I'll tell you. But I've done 210 of these.
And I listened, and I'm like, oh my! I remember going to an event in LA early on with my son when he was, I don't know, had to be somewhere around 14 or 15, and there was a car show that I don't think they do anymore. And we had to see Ivan Stewart, and he was giving, he was working with Toyota at the time, and he was giving autographs, and my son was just beyond thrilled. He was so excited. And so that's the perspective I come at it with. I'm like, oh, great.
We'll see. But there's a lot of people out there that would put you on the same platform, if not higher than Ivan.
I don't think so, but that's very kind of you to say.
He's a racer, and he's done some things, good for around the racing community. But without people like yourself, there wouldn't be much of this going on.
Well, thanks.
So,
we think so. We're a rather nerdy bunch. Those of us who are doing it now. I think there was more of a heyday, probably, when Ed Waldheim and, Bob Hammer in the thick of things. It's changed in recent years, I would say in the last 15 years. You really have to know your stuff.
True.
And it's not as easy. And it's not like stamping your feet on the ground.
Right.
You have to be more calculated, not in a bad sense, but in a I call it being pointed but polite.
Right.
So anyway.
So that's, what that's a great lead into what we're doing. Amy, it is so good to have you here on the podcast with me, and I'm really looking forward to this. I've gotten to know you a lot more than I had in the past, and it's good that we're having a chance to sit down and talk.
Well, thank you. I'm very honored to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
So let's go ahead and get started right at the beginning. And where were you born and raised?
I was born right outside of New York City and raised there until I was about 17 and a half years old, 18 years old. And I went to overseas for a college course and I stayed. So
Well, how long did you stay? Because obviously you did come back.
I did come
Unless
back.
overseas, you're talking about the waterway there.
No, and came back with a family and moved to Texas. I had some great experiences traveling around Europe, little in the Middle East, and off-roading is more of a way of life when you get out into the country. So it doesn't have a special name; it just is, and it's a way to travel. It's a way to see. It's a way to get from place to place, and it was how we did it. We had everything from a Scout to a Subaru and just traveled around seeing places. And it was kind of what I still love to do today.
And those early years in New York or just outside of New York City, what was I mean, was it like a suburb or were you farther
Yeah,
out?
yeah, it was a suburb.
Okay.
My dad worked in New York City. And the neat thing about it is my family had some property out on Long Island, used to travel there, and my uncle was a hunter. And so we were exposed to the outdoors and hunting pretty early on. I rode horses from the time I was about 5, started very early and competed in shows. And that was uh, I continued riding until I was about 25 and training. In Texas, I trained Arabian horses on a horse farm.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. And what was your what was school like for you? Were you, most of the time the ladies that I interview, they're more studious than the men I interview. Were you studious?
Um, yeah, it's a little bit more complicated for me because I was in college at 16.
Okay.
And I did a couple of years in college and then kind of got bored. That's when I started traveling. I took a college course in Israel and finished some college in Israel and actually in architecture and traveled around. So I got my schooling done and out of the way pretty early on. And I just loved traveling. So that's what I did. But I got married and started having children. First son was born when I was 22. So everything was moved up a couple of years from the norm because I was in college so young.
Right. And how much time did you spend outside of the United States?
Probably about 5 years.
5 years. Okay. And you met your husband while you were in Europe or
Yep.
overseas. Okay. And what made the move to Texas happen?
Oh, family. Um, Having a family business there. And I was right outside of Houston. And it was a great area to raise kids in. I had 2 more kids there. Ended up in Houston itself. Houston has a great business environment, but then you also have things like rodeos. And I was able to continue with um, my work in training horses and working with horses until I realized you sort of can't have children and horses at the same time because it's very expensive and it requires a lot of focus. But my oldest son was on a horse when he was 6 months old, with his mother holding him.
There you go.
So all of my kids had a background in being around animals. And then that continued when we moved to California. And my youngest son was in FFA in the area south of Sacramento where we lived in the Delta and raised, let's see, lambs, pigs, ducks, probably something else. So we had all kinds of animals all around. So they always lived close to nature.
Nice. Very nice. And is that when you, where was it that you got into true off-roading?
That happened because of a difficult circumstance. I had, in the interim, gotten divorced, and I was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease that only about 40,000 people in the world have. And for a while, it took away my ability to walk long distances. I'm still affected by that today, even though the disease itself is in remission. And I still had a 9-year-old at home. My older two kids were a little bit older and more self-sufficient. In fact, my oldest at that point in time went into the Navy. He's a Navy veteran, spent 8 years, was in the first Afghanistan war on the USS Carl Vinson.
Okay.
But I needed to spend some quality time with my 9-year-old. Not being able to walk was a difficulty. And until a friend of mine said, "You have a Ford truck, it has 4-wheel drive, what are you waiting for?" And I said, "You're right." And because I'd had all this experience earlier on in life, in my 20s, we started off at Hollister Hills and we went off-roading and we loved it. And it was great fun. He loved it. I loved it. So we went pretty often. And then that's where I met my husband, on a trail.
Oh,
So
okay.
he was behind me in a Jeep telling me I wasn't going fast enough, which he still does often when I'm driving. And we haven't been apart since. So state parks plays a very important role in my life, because not only did I realize what it gave to me as a single mother and how it allowed me to feel, I didn't have a whole lot of friends at that point in the off-roading world, but we did the trails in Hollister, did as much as we could, and I felt safe. I knew there were people there I could turn to if I went and had problems. I didn't have any problems, but just knowing that as a single mom there with my son, that there were rangers available, that the trails were managed and maintained for off-road use, gave me a great deal of confidence going into this. And we just had so much fun, and it was such a release, because for disabled people, and this is important, um, disabled people, you can't always see when they're in pain, and you can't always see when they have hardships. But when you get in a vehicle, you're the same as everyone else. You're traveling the same as everyone else, and no one is looking at you aside and saying, "Oh, he or she has a disability or is different." My truck, I was just the same as everybody else. We were all trying to go over the same obstacles. We're all looking at the challenges on the trail ahead. And for me, that was a great relief, because um, it's very tiring having people look at you and what you can't do. They were looking at me in my truck and seeing what I could do. And that's a very big difference. And it's important, because as people go through lives, you don't know when you're going to end up with that disability. I was pretty young at the time, but elderly people will find the same thing. You're not able to do at 65 what you did at 45.
Amen.
Um,
I know that now. I'm 66 and my knees are both need to be replaced. I've got a hip that should be replaced. My shoulders probably need work on them. And, I'm a mess when it comes to, I've just abused my body, and I cannot do the things that I did when I was 20 to 50, even 20 to 60.
mhm. I think we can all relate. My challenges just started earlier than that.
Right.
And for me, then moving forward in my life, the other really critical juncture where I realized that off-roading wasn't treated the same as other forms of recreation happened when I went out, and my husband and I had been together for a year. We went to go to Panamint Valley and Surprise Canyon, which was one of his favorite trails. And He had pictures from the last time he did it. He said, "You'll love it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It goes up to Panama City." And we got to the gate, and we were with friends, and it was locked, and there was a big gate. I mean, where before there hadn't been a gate. And none of us understood what had happened. There was a gate, it was locked, it said no entrance. There was a way to go in by foot, so I couldn't walk that far. So my friends, my husband went to investigate, and it was a beautiful trail that had been concrete but was broken up, and still provided access up to Panama City. But in the interim, between he had been there in 1999, we went back in 2001. It had gone through a redesignation, and it was designated as a wild and scenic river. And this we found out afterwards. But I waited by that gate, and I encouraged everyone to go. I knew I couldn't go, but I wanted to know what happened, and they wanted to know what happened. But I sat by that gate, and it was kind of a warm day, and just frustrated and crying because I couldn't go with them, and I was stopped in my Jeep from going with them. I was prohibited from going someplace. And then the realization hit me is that this beautiful place that I had seen photos of, I will never, ever be able to get back there. I will never be able to see that area or that trail or go up to Panama City. And that's not okay. That treatment of off-roading and how it negatively affects people is not okay. It is not acceptable in this way, in this area. And when I honestly tried to find out how this was designated as a wild and scenic river, because it was a road, it was a real road. I didn't get the answers back that I thought I should get. I didn't get a comprehensive analysis on this is what we did, from the off-road community and those in the off-road community. All I got was, well, we couldn't do anything about it. We tried this, but there was no substantive information I was given. I was actually sort of figuratively pat on the head and given a pat on the head and told, well, you wouldn't understand it anyway. And that's the wrong thing to say to me, just if anybody wonders. And I had a lot of time after that because I was ill for a number of years, from 2001 until about 2005, 2006, and I had a lot of time to read court cases and look at legal analyses and see what had been done for the off-road community. And that time was invaluable. I was on disability at the time and couldn't really move anyway. And I saw how the deck was stacked against us. And I said to myself, this wasn't an area I had ever studied, but my father was an attorney. And so I knew about legal analyses. We all knew. And we knew about critical thinking, and said, if I can make a difference in this area, if I can make it more fair to people, that's what I want to do in my life. And that's kind of when I dedicated my life. Sounds very black and white. It was a much longer process. But off-roaders, when we went out, when I was healthy enough to go off-road, off-roaders were my family. They were my friends. They became the people that we relied on for help. And I never was on a trail where we had a problem and we're on the side of a trail that somebody wouldn't stop. Sometimes a number of people and say, do you need anything? Do you need water? Are you okay? Do you need help? And this was mostly in and around the trails in the El Dorado and the Rubicon. And you can't stop on the Rubicon and not have somebody, come after you and say, can we help you? What's going on?
True.
And that, to me, I'm just so indebted for that consideration. And when people talk about off-roaders, it really upsets me because they're mischaracterizing our generosity. They're mischaracterizing who we are as people. I should say that when I became really disabled There have been 3 periods of time in my life that I couldn't walk at all. And I still have my wheelchair. My husband says it's time to sell it, but it's kind of like my good luck charm. Like if I have it, I'll never need it again. And I had friends in the Sierra Club because we lived for about 10 years near Point Lobos in Carmel. And we used to go there all the time. And my kids grew up there. And before, with my youngest, we moved to Sacramento. And the responses from my friends in the Sierra Club when I couldn't walk weren't, well, we'll find a way to get you up the mountain, because I've always loved mountains. It was, you have to sit in the parking lot in your car and watch us go up on the mountains, because that's the right thing to do. Again,
Not okay.
it's not the right thing to tell me. And I said to myself, I'll be damned if that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to lose my mountains. I'm not going to lose the ability to travel where I want to travel, where I love to travel, where I need to travel, for for my soul. And there are times in my life that just having the photos of off-road trails, especially, I have a big photo a friend of mine took during a difficult period health-wise of the Ducey Ersham Trail up at like 10,000 feet. And I had that across from my bed, and I would look at it and say, I'm going to get there again one day. And what all of this says is my connection to the off-road community is more than just I like to ride in my Jeep. It is, if this is what it brought me to the point where now I can pretty much go wherever I want. I can travel, my legs are working. But if this is the healing that it brought me, it could do this for other people as well.
Correct.
And they have to have places to go. And the way we're treated now has improved, I have to say, by the persistence of a lot of people, not just me, but all of us working together to achieve a common goal.
Question: do you think that Panamint Valley will ever be reopened?
Surprise Canyon, no, there's no way for it to be reopened.
Okay.
There are other places to go in Panamint Valley, but Surprise Canyon, a designation, there's some designations that are worse than others. Wild and Scenic River is one of my pet peeves. It's pretty much one of the worst designations you can get outside of out and out wilderness, capital wilderness, congressionally designated wilderness, because what a wild and scenic river means is that anything that affects the view shed, the actual scenic quality of the wild and scenic river designation can lead to a closure. It could be way up the road. It could be outside of the actual wild and scenic river area. But if those who are opposed to access can prove that it negatively affects this wild and scenic river, you can have closures in areas that you don't even consider. It's a very broad designation, and there is no way to come back from that. There's no way to reverse that. And that's why we have to hit these things early on. Wild and Scenic River, really bad. National monuments, a little bit better, possibly. Another pet peeve. So you have to understand the differences in these designations to understand, what do I really need to fight against? What is really going to affect me? And what needs to be watched carefully, because anything can affect off-road recreation, but doesn't need to become a political statement, because what we're working with is policy, it's not politics. And there is a difference. Sometimes off-roaders don't understand the difference.
No, we're at times pretty simple people.
I wouldn't say simple. I would say that we know what we like and we know what we love to do. Um, and after a long week at work, we just want to get out there on the trail because we know the joy that it'll bring us.
Right. And that's more what I mean. I don't mean simple in the fact that we're uneducated. We may have our education may be in other areas, and but we know that what we enjoy is being out in the woods, out in the desert, along the beaches and the sand dunes, all those places that we have public lands, and that they're being shut down for it to us.
Mm-hmm.
We're at constant battle. I mean, the whole monument movement going on right now with this current administration's America the Beautiful plan, or whatever you want to call it. I'm sure there's another word for it, but it's our public lands are under assault.
Well, the national monuments, again, they're a pet peeve. The Mojave Trails National Monument may break the rules, and we're looking at it very carefully and the management plan. So what happens is immediately after the designation of a national monument, agencies are not given any more money or manpower to manage that national monument designation. But what it does bring about is they have to do a new management plan. They're required to do a new management plan. So the Mojave Trails National Monument obviously has the Mojave Trail, which is a long established OHV route. And so far, it seems that the agency is taking access to the Mojave Trail and other trails in the Mojave Trails National Monument very seriously. And they're guaranteeing access to it because they understand that if they don't, off-roaders are going to come anyway. And I can't really comment on civil disobedience, but the agency is being pretty good. There are a lot of off-roaders that are involved in the planning process. And it may work out okay. And if that's the case, then that may break or actually create a positive precedence for what a national monument will do. The proposed Chuckwalla National Monument, I've been on meetings with that, and we've talked to the advocates for that. There is a proposed OHV area by the BLM within the boundaries of that proposal that is called Mechacopia. And it's kind of a neat system that the BLM has wants to establish as a new OHV area. And we are hopeful that that whole system, since the BLM has already started analysis on it, will be excluded or kind of either grandfathered into the Chuckwalla National Monument, which we do believe will be designated pretty soon. But only thing the National Monument does is exclude people. And that's the whole purpose. Excludes OHV, excludes people, doesn't allow activity to take place. So it's bad for everyone, not just OHV. But getting other people to realize that is kind of hard.
It is, because so many people that say, oh, yeah, that sounds good, we should protect the lands, are the people that never go out and try to enjoy those lands.
Well, it's more than that. Every land in California, we went through a pretty difficult period of time where we went through not only Forest Service travel management, but Recreation and Resource Management Plan, or RMPs, for all the BLM field offices. So we went through this roughly between 2010 and 2020. That was a time when areas were codified. And besides that, going through the Johnson Valley designation area with the Department of Defense, that was a separate process, but also took place during that period of time. But there are a lot of states like Nevada and Utah that didn't go through this process. So their areas are a little bit more at risk. Now they have wide open areas and tons of trail systems throughout Utah, and we've seen what has happened with that. And in Nevada, which have no designation process, and now coupled with the new conservation rule, which I do believe will be taken to court by the oil and gas and cattlemen's associations, which the conservation rule directly targeted. more than OHV, but we may have an opportunity to support them in this process. Um, so in a way, in California, we're lucky that we already went through this. We already went through the designation process, and we have a lot of opportunities. Chappie Shasta, for example, the Fort Sage area up in the Eagle Lake field office, South Cal Mountain, besides all the ones down south that people know about, that already have been designated. What gets harmed in these processes is just the ability to explore. So people might call that overlanding. I sort of call it exploring, because that's what you want to do. You want to go see places. You want to, enjoy the history behind either the 49ers and, the gold rush, or the silver rush in Panamint Valley and Death Valley and those areas. And it's really fun to go look. And in some cases, you'll be on the same road as silver miners, traveled, 100 years ago. And that's cool. And it's a great place to take kids and have them understand history when you're actually on the ground where that history took place.
Right, not just looking in a book.
Right. And so that's how we raised our kids. Um, and because we wanted them to understand. Um, and California is amazing for the amount of history. But just being able to explore, when you hit a national monument designation, for example, Snowberry National Monument in Northern California, there were some OHV advocates that were in support of that. I was not. CORVA was not. And the reason why we were not in support of it is because of what eventually happened. There is a proclamation, and what the proclamation does is it spell out the criteria what eventually is going to be in a management plan. And OHV recreation came out in level of importance 10 out of 10 in that proclamation. So before any OHV opportunities can be considered, every bird or bee or every other type of access is considered before OHV recreation. That means we just get what's left. That doesn't guarantee anything.
No.
And now they're expanding it. We fully expect within the next few days, actually, for the expansion of the Snowberry as a national monument, for that to be announced. And there happens to be a single track trail system in that area of the expansion area. And we don't know what's going to happen to that single track system. Again, there's going to need to be a management plan, but OHV recreation will come last. And that's not okay. But that is a political decision. Not every policy decision is a political decision, and I guess the wisdom is knowing the difference, as they say in the Serenity Prayer.
So explain to me what the difference is.
Well, the majority of decisions are made by line officers in one position or another. It could be a field office manager, maybe a district ranger, or a supervisor, or a forest supervisor. And those are career officers or career employees in either the Forest Service or the BLM. They are outside the political process. They are influenced by the political process, but that's not why why they are there. They're there to do a job. And that job remains no matter which administration is in place. So the relationships that you have and those decision-making processes, what you have to figure out is how much will it be influenced by either the state director of the BLM or the regional forester for the Forest Service. And that's where relationships are really, really important, because people who generally get these positions are people who have been in the agency for a long time. They are somewhat political appointments, but in the end, not really, because they're people who have gone through multiple administrations. in multiple positions. That's what we have in the Forest Service now. The regional forester is Jen Ebeline. I've known her since about 2010 or 11 when she was in the regional office in Vallejo, but in a much lower position. Now she's worked her way up to regional forester, which is the top in California. And she's been through multiple decision-making processes, multiple administrations. These are policy decisions. They're not political decisions. And most of them are years in the making. So it's not that one administration can really generally change the trajectory of that decision. But there are things like the Endangered Species Act, which will influence a decision. Travel management was in the works through Republican and Democratic administrations. How it was interpreted on the ground was through the regional forester at the time. So that's why you need influence with the regional forester and the people who are making those decisions. So this is policy. It's not politics. These people are around for a long time. Pretty much the same thing in state parks. Although the higher you go in state parks, the more it is an administration appointment for the position. But a lot of the decision-making authority when it comes to what happens in SVRAs or state parks actually happens with long-term state parks employees who have been through multiple administrations. Again, it's policy. When we get too mired into the political aspect of it, and let's say CORVA in the founders' original wisdom is nonpartisan, and we work with all administrations. And the reason behind that is if you endorse a candidate and that candidate, let's say, does not get elected to office, why would the person who did get elected to office, why would they talk to you? You
Right.
endorsed his or her, opposition. And you lose the ability to influence. By staying nonpartisan, we're able to talk to anybody. We're able to work with every administration. It may seem counterintuitive, but there are actually off-roaders that have political opinions all over the spectrum. There is not one. You can't say that there are off-roaders who aren't libertarians or Democrats or Republicans. They're all over the place. We're a family that we want to encourage all of our members to participate, all of our members to get involved in policy decisions. Comes to politics, that could separate people. It divides people. It does not bring people together.
True, that's one of many areas that does that.
Well, that's why, again, it's wise to understand where policy is coming from. In the case of the new conservation rule, which just the final came out within the last day or two, CORVA wrote substantive comments against it because we didn't feel that it was right to elevate conservation to a role of actually a use, because conservation happens during the designation process, during the NEPA or National Environmental Policy Act analyses for each and every area that there is an analysis. It has to happen according to federal guidelines. So conservation already happens. Why do you need to elevate it to a use, which obviously it's not a use, it's a non-use? So that doesn't make sense, but that's why I believe that the rule will be taken to court. And that was a political decision by the current Secretary of the Interior. It's, like I said, it takes sometimes the wisdom of Solomon, to give a biblical reference, to understand the difference of what you can approach from a policy standpoint without dividing the community by going into a political discussion. I do not agree with many of the decisions that have come out of the Department of the Interior during the current administration. but the Forest Service has succeeded at following the original party line that the service has adopted. So they've been very consistent in their analyses. They have not significantly changed during this administration from the last administration. And again, all this I preface in that this is California. CORVA is the California Off-Road Vehicle Association. We keep track of what goes on in our neighboring states. But what we specialize in is California, keeping off-road opportunities open and accessible to everyone in California. So my viewpoints are also from a California perspective.
Right. Absolutely. And there's not as many opportunities but more people in the state that try to recreate with the off-highway vehicles.
Yeah, that's why we supported the start of the OHV Access Project, and why we support state parks in that, because CORVA was part of the group, along with San Diego Off-Road Coalition and American Sand Association in our lobbying group that supported SB 155 back in 2021 that created the OHV Access Project. And that was in response to the loss of the Alameda Tesla expansion area of Carnegie SVRA, which was a difficult loss. And it was after a lot of people worked really hard and objected to it. There was just nothing more you're going to do, and we were going to lose those 3,000 acres. Instead, we got a big pot of money to look for more opportunities in California. And I don't think that there's another state that has something really this exciting. We are looking at state parks, we're looking at state recreation areas, and not every form of recreation will have access to every new opportunity. So there may be some for ROVs or side-by-sides that may not be appropriate for dirt bikes. There may be some for dirt bikes, not appropriate for side-by-sides. And there may be some street legal opportunities that I believe will happen at Henry Coe State Park, which is old ranches that were put together, and purchased by state parks over a number of years, with tons of roads through there, already existing roads, fishing areas. It's amazing backcountry. And there's acres. Whether we'll get non-street legal recreation in there, I'm not sure, but street legal recreation, I do believe will happen in the next, year or two. And that's for Jeeps, venture bikes, overlanders, dual sports. So it still serves a lot of people in our community. The advent and the popularity of side-by-sides has brought another whole complexity to the issue, because they need places to go, and that's where we've seen the real expansion of OHV recreation. And yet they began to get more popular after the BLM and the Forest Service did all their travel management analyses. So nothing was specifically planned for side-by-sides. And this is why we're going trail by trail, step by step in each individual forest, looking at areas to reopen specifically to give side-by-side access. Because you're right, the popularity of that, people want to go and they want to do things. And they have this amazing new piece of technology that can do anything and go anywhere. They need to have those areas to do anything and go anywhere.
Right.
And so we have to find it, and that's one of the goals. And so, at our annual meeting, we sort of focused on CORVA's annual meeting on how to reopen trails in national forests. We have 18 forests. How do we designate more for side-by-sides? And that's an everyday, it's not a battle, but it's an everyday analysis of looking at what had been closed in the past and how can we get it reopened. And I really think we can. And it takes a very thoughtful analysis. What it doesn't take is yelling, screaming, stamping your feet on the, figuratively stamping your feet on the ground, or because the line officers who are working with the Forest Service or the forest supervisor, they need an excuse to work with us. And if we say we need these loop opportunities, here's the analysis of how many more vehicles we have that are off-roaders now. You need to meet the expectations of the visitors you're having. Many people don't know that the BLM and Forest Service are also supposed to meet the expectation of the visitors that go to their facilities. And so one of my favorite questions to ask them are, how are you meeting the expectations of the visitors? And if you want to see somebody's eyes get very wide open and they look at you with like a complete clueless,
Right.
you know, look on their face, ask them that question. But that is a requirement. And if they're not meeting the expectations of the visitors and they're not giving the opportunities, that's the opportunity for someone who knows that forest really well to go in and say, okay, I have some ideas about where this form of recreation could go. Let me show you, and partner with them.
If you can get them to accept that. Because I know
I
that
didn't
that's part of
say
their expectation or what their job description is,
persistence.
but
Yeah, well, I didn't say persistence wouldn't be required.
right.
Um, when we're working with federal agencies, and I am very grateful to work with people um, in CORVA that, and out of CORVA, I mean, other advocates that have um, a lot of knowledge of the ins and outs of policy. And, we ask each other, and where, who knows who best? So who has a relationship with someone in the San Bernardino or the Angeles National Forest? We need to find the people who are doing the work in the forest at some point and have already have these relationships and say, let me come in. So we did a project in the Cleveland National Forest. I happen to know the supervisor of the Cleveland National Forest because he was a district ranger in the San Bernardino, and then he was a deputy forest supervisor in the Stanislaus, where I got to know him really well. But when he was in the San Bernardino, he got to know Ed Waldheim really well. So that was easy. And now he's supervisor of the Cleveland. And there was a road, the only road supplying access from Riverside County that has a lot of off-roaders to the northern Cleveland National Forest was closed due to fire and road conditions. And we worked for 2 years with a local group called the Cleveland Caretakers, local geologist, licensed geologist with the state of California who helped us, and Tread Lightly. And Riverside County gave us 2 grants to get the work done to enable that road, Indian Truck Trail, to be reopened. It was not quick. Took a lot of people working together. Tread Lightly was necessary because it required a lot of repairs. And they have a master agreement with National Forest Service, so we could work under their auspices. Also, California Trails Users Coalition, a 501c3, was involved in getting the grants from Riverside County. So it took all these entities working together along with the local group on the ground that said, we will remain engaged. We will do the maintenance on this road. We want it to be reopened. And that's how it happened. These things can happen. And the Forest Service had vowed never to reopen this road. So we started off with them first saying no. Then we got them to say, all right, you have a plan. And then we got them to say yes. But
That's
we were
amazing.
we were very persistent. But this is one road. But think about Riverside County, huge county.
Oh, absolutely.
And so why, you'd ask yourself, why wasn't there access to the Cleveland National Forest from Riverside County? Everyone forgot. The county forgot. People forgot. There were roads. Those roads eventually became incorporated in development. Nobody thought about it. There was always another road. If one road got closed, something else was open. When Indian Truck Trail was closed, there were no more routes. And all of a sudden, people, including the forest, said, uh-oh, we messed up.
Right.
So we were able to help solve it. But it is a geologically active road, which doesn't mean earthquakes necessarily. It just means that the underpinning of the road is very it's very gravelly. It's very loose. Recommended high clearance vehicles. It's open to OHV and street legal vehicles. Um, just be careful when you travel it, but it does provide access. So now people are able to enjoy public land again.
Great. Where are some other success stories?
You know, there are success stories actually throughout California, and I have to credit Mike McGarity, the president of CORVA, and a lot of other people have been active in the Sierra National Forest. They've had two processes to look at trails that were open to closed during travel management, and that now have been reopened. The first one didn't exactly do as much for reopening as we would have liked to have seen, so now they're embarking on another one. New single track system in the Tahoe National Forest out of the Truckee Ranger District. The Connected Communities Project is something that a lot of people might have heard about. It's a very interesting plan that comes from Greg Williams, who's with the Sierra Buttes Trail Stewardship. They have gotten state grants and a lot of state money actually to pursue this. And what it does is exactly what it sounds like. So it will take people, it's multiple use trails, OHV included, from community to community, like Sierraville and other communities in starting from Downeyville in Northern California. And this is so people can stop, have lunch or dinner, get supplies, gas at the small towns in and around Sierra County, Plumas County, and be able to enjoy the rides. Another couple of instances of success stories have to do with the California State Legislature passing pilot projects. And I know people say, well, the California State Legislature doesn't do anything. And you'd be very surprised because they did pass two pilot projects, one in the city of Needles and the other in Inyo County, to do to have trails that allow OHV access to communities or multiple use trails. And they work with the CHP to designate these, and that people on OHV vehicles will have access to cities and towns in and around. And Needles is right on the border of Nevada, and that's gone through without any problems. Inyo County, they have one trail opened with that. We hope to see more, but we've had a few hiccups, more hiccups. But if those are successful, we can repeat those in other areas. And this is primarily good for areas like Mariposa, outside of Yosemite National Forest, any of these small towns that would like OHV recreation and like access, and will increase their economic viability for the small towns. So it wouldn't be for the larger towns. But those projects, again, passed by a legislature that you might not think would be favorable to off-road recreation, but they were.
It's like they must not have known about it. It must have been hidden
No,
somewhere.
it wasn't hidden, and they did know. But there are reasons why. There are groups like Rural County Representatives of California, RCRC, and we've worked with them and continue. But there are a lot of rural counties in California. They've gotten together and said we can be a lobbying force. And that's part of the lobbying force that lobbies for these. And so it works outside of the political process, because this incorporates counties who may have all sorts of political, some may be Democratic, lean Democratic, others may lean Republican, but they get together to support issues that are important to rural counties.
Right. And that's a good thing.
It's great. They're really good people. They do really hard work. Their board of directors is made up of people on boards of supervisors for rural counties, so they know what they're talking about.
What is on the horizon that, like, what's hit my radar lately is this whole 30 by 30 thing. And, I've got, I'm beyond just the California with where I go,
Yeah.
and who the people that influence me and who I can influence are, it's all across the nation. And this 30 by 30 is something that I'm seeing and I'm not happy about, but I'm sure that there's plenty of other people out there that are thrilled with it. Most of them are not OHVers. What's most important on your radar, whether it be California or national right now?
Well, I'm glad you asked about it because 30 by 30, California was first, and the federal 30 by 30s started after Californians. I can tell you how California has interpreted it and what's going on with it. We have far surpassed a 30% threshold for conservation in one form or another, whether it's wilderness designations, recommended wilderness, or conservation easements. We know we have passed the 30%. In California now, I think they've gotten up to officially 24.1%, somewhere around there, maybe 24.6, I don't remember. But how they've interpreted in California is getting these large, somewhat urban located or more suburban located agricultural tracts and getting them under conservation easements. That's by far been the most popular way to go. So it doesn't mean that grazing can take place. Um, it just means that development will not take place. So what they've targeted is development. They have not targeted OHV. And people, whenever I say that, they say, how could you say that? I said, it's very easy to say that because what they're targeting in California is land that is in a more pristine state than we can offer in areas that support OHV recreation. So our land has not been considered. I mean, I'm sure the Sierra Club, Wilderness Society, California Wilderness Coalition, they've put forth areas for 30 by 30, including Oceano Dunes, SVRA. All state parks are off the table, by the way, according to the regulations that came out with 30 by 30. So state parks are not considered as part of this. State preserves are considered part of the conservation number, but the rest of state parks are excluded from consideration. So by focusing on agricultural, think large ranches, Tahone Ranch, all these areas that really do have a more pristine environment are the ones where you're seeing more and more conservation easements. And land trusts are the ones who are in charge of monitoring those conservation easements. So OHV areas have not come on the radar by the people doing the actual 30 by 30 work by California state government and people in the Natural Resources Agency. It doesn't mean that we're not on every meeting. It doesn't mean that we're not looking closely. There is a citizens committee. We have an affiliation with California Backcountry Anglers and Hunters and Anglers, and they are on the citizens committee to look for issues that might affect hunters and anglers. And Devin's a really good guy. We have a great relationship, so he's looking out for OHV interests as well. Again, that's in California.
Okay.
Along the rest of the country, because California already has such a strong start on this, we were not as vulnerable to it. Now, I know it's a political thing and people love to hate 30 by 30. I'm not a fan. I'm watching it, I'm monitoring it. So far, we're okay. It has hurt hunting access far more than it's hurt OHV access. It has hurt just some areas like in the Sierra where there were fishing holes that people, communities always went to. some of that access we have lost. That wasn't necessarily OHV access. That was just access by people, who live in small towns where they always had this area. And of course you can go swimming there in the summer. Some of that has been lost. It's not necessarily affiliated with OHV recreation, but it's a loss nonetheless. How it will be interpreted out of California, because OHV is so minimal in the amount of people who engage in it as compared to, and minimal in our political influence. And that's where, again, that difference in knowing politics and policy, it comes so important. The one thing I can tell other OHV advocates is what OHV has gotten to be known for is saying no to everything. If you're known for saying no to everything, saying we don't want 30 by 30, we don't like 30 by 30, all it gets you is excluded from the table. You can say, this doesn't sound good for my community. I'd like to work with you and see how I can protect access for my community while you can achieve your goals as well. Then you're invited to the table. We don't have enough political influence to create these policies. We do have enough political influence to be involved in how the policy is interpreted, if we are smart about how we engage our people and how we engage the influence that we do have.
Very, very well stated. Very well.
Being at the table is key to all of this. And if I know OHV advocates who have gotten excluded from the table because the supposition is, well, they're just going to say no anyway, and they're going to hate everything we do. So, why should we include them? They're going to go off on some political rant. I've been lucky enough that I have not been painted with that. So I invited to a lot of tables. And I am like a mother bear for my community and will not give up on my community in any way, shape, or form. And if anybody wants to know how stubborn I am, just you can ask my husband. But I will fight for my community in a way in that our interests are considered. And that's not by saying no. And it's not by fear tactics. It's by working within the system to make sure that your community is protected.
Well said. Okay. I have a hard time myself saying, well, let's talk about this. I'm one of those that wants to stomp my feet and say, no, this is enough. And I
get it. But what you're stamping your feet at is, I think, is different than what you think it is. The reason why you feel that way.
I got to where I wanted to stamp my feet all the time is because nobody seemed to be wanting to listen or care what we were having to say. And it was always, everybody was looking at it, well, okay, if we compromise a little bit and give them something, then we can keep something else. And I just kept looking at it as the more that we compromise, we're just playing into their hands of every time they come back to the table, they're just going to take a little more and a little more and a little more. And I just kept seeing that happen to the point where, our corridor was getting smaller and smaller and smaller with everything that we were trying to achieve. And we were just like smiling about it. Okay, well, thank you for giving, thank you for taking that away, but not taking it all away. And that's when I started, to get frustrated and kind of walked away from the table on land use issues and took what I was doing commercially and just said, okay, I'm not going to try to do this on public lands anymore, even though I have a right as a business to do that. I'm just taking it elsewhere.
So it's a perfect example of everything we did wrong. And I think we started it doing it wrong in the 90s from what I could figure out. And this is not a criticism on the people who came before me because they dealt with whatever the issues were then.
Right.
You know, I started with travel management in the El Dorado National Forest and the issues with water quality on the Rubicon, you know, roughly 2004, 2005. And started with Randy Burleson, who you know well. And we did not want to compromise at
Right.
all.
Me neither.
But some of the methodology that was already in place from people who came before us, that methodology said, take what you can get. And my response to that was not only no, but hell no. But this attitude sort of was pervasive, I have to say. And the advocates who viewed it that way, again, I'm not seeking to criticize, but we had a very hard time in the beginning, and where Forest Service individuals or district rangers, forest superintendents will say, well, so and so represents your community, and he or she said this was okay with them. And we had to say, it's not okay with us. And that led to, for the El Dorado, we went and actually had, it wasn't a riot, but we gathered at in Placerville at at the fairgrounds, and we went on an overpass over Highway 50, you know, with signs and everything else to say, we are here. We are not going anywhere. In El Dorado, if you remember what we ended up with right after travel management, we had 42 trails reopened after all the work was done on those 42 trails. Now, some of them had to be hardened, some of them needed, it was standard and guideline 100, which has to do with water connectivity in the forest. Some of them we had to do reroutes. There were some groups and clubs that did incredible work to get those routes reopened, but they're reopened. So 42 trails that were not in the original travel management plan, in the 5 years after that was completed, those were reopened. The off-road community did that by being at the table, by insisting that they could fix the issues, they could do reroutes, and they did it. So it's kind of like the Barrett Lake Trail. You know, the Highlanders did incredible work getting those bridges in.
Right.
That took a lot of money and a lot of persistence. But I agree with you. We should not compromise. That said, we need a trail system that makes sense. We need a trail system that provides loop opportunities. And the biggest fight that we've had lately has been with travel management that's done for over snow vehicles. Over snow vehicles it gets very short shrift in California because we only have about 16,000 green sticker sleds registered in California, which isn't very much. But they're some of my best friends, and they're awesome people, and their access deserves to be protected as well. So now we're going through travel management with 6 forests. One of them has been completed, the Stanislaus, and it came out with a horrible system, and that plan is being sued by the Sierra Snowmobile Foundation. And what they did, and they're sort of realizing the errors of the ways in the Forest Service, is they bow to the pressure of, and this is when I say people blame politics for it. What they really should blame sometimes is the court system and the judges. The inability of off-road to file lawsuits that are effective. And you have to be really, really careful. Now, I have sued as lead plaintiff, the federal government, actually twice. Most important one was done with Pacific Legal Foundation and CORVA. I was the lead plaintiff, and we lost on appeal, but we still filed. But it did not, the loss was not did not negatively affect OHV recreation. We involved two counties, Plumas and Butte County, and the effect on their citizens from the negative travel management decisions. We may have lost in court, but we got some of those trails reopened since then. So, it was worth it. Pacific Legal Foundations argues in front of the Supreme Court all the time. So they are very capable attorneys, and they took our case. But we have not had very many court victories that can help us, and that's been kind of problematic. It would be nice to get a case, and for all those people that say you're disabled, we have the American for Disability Act. We have tried that route. The American for Disability Act protects access to built environments. It does not protect access to trails, open areas, anything that isn't built. A built environment means a campground, it means a restroom. It does not mean an open area or a trail. Doesn't mean we haven't tried and we haven't pursued that avenue, because we have some very, very good attorneys, but there is no precedence for that. Just saying, because people ask me about that often.
Right.
But I really don't agree with compromising. Then again, you have to say, why aren't you going to compromise? So why should, I come to the conclusion after doing this for a while that people are very self-interested. It doesn't matter if you're a politician or you're with an agency. In the back of their mind, perhaps even subconsciously, I think for politicians it's consciously, is what's in this for me? So my challenge to off-roaders is, if you're just saying no, you're stamping your feet, why should someone listen to you? The response is because what they want to do is they want to remove themselves from the problem and from the person going nuts and go, yeah, well, I'll look into it. And then you never hear back from them again. If you don't stamp your feet and you come and say, this is the Forest Service regulation as I understand it, this is your requirements. If it's BLM, it's FLPMA, Federal Land Policy and Management Act. With Forest Service, it's Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. Say, this is your requirement as you should be operating according to your principles that were laid out by Congress in your requirements in the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. Let's talk about it. And then they go internally, oh crap, this person knows what they're talking about. I have to pay attention to them. That's the difference. Know your stuff, know the regulations, the rules and regulations for the agency, no matter which agency it is, better than they know it themselves, and come with a cogent, well thought out argument, and there are plenty of them for OHV recreation, that means they have to keep our roads and trails open and don't compromise.
So how can my listeners help? What can we do?
The most important thing for OHV advocates on the ground, and this is why I'm a board member of Tread Lightly, is to follow the TREAD principles, be good stewards of the land. I will always point out all the adopt trail work and the volunteer work that the off-road community does. That shouldn't happen once a year or twice a year on a cleanup. That has to happen every time you're off-road. Make sure you're leaving the area better than you found it. A lot of Jeepers and four-wheel drive enthusiasts are great about having the little sacks, the sackets on the back of their spare tires, and they will take trash. But read the TREAD principles, understand what Tread Lightly really means, and follow it through, because people are watching you, whether you realize it or not. And because we're somewhat controversial, any little thing, that we do that may be wrong, will get exaggerated. So understand that peer pressure is important too. So if you're out wheeling or riding with people that are doing the wrong thing, and I'll never forget when it happened to my husband and he went off the trail, everyone we were with started yelling at him, including me at one time. Never did it again. This was a long time ago. Um, Stay on the designated trails. If you don't agree with the designated trail system, let me know. Let me know what's wrong. Not, I need more access because I want to go more places. Is there a view shed? Is there an important, I don't know, destination point at a trail that you're not being allowed access to? I can argue for that all day long. Um, what I can't argue is I've always gone here, my family's always used this road, and you can't take that away from me. But the first thing I ask people, especially now with roads and forests, could it be a fire break? Is this road, can it serve an important purpose? If there is, a fire breaks out in the area, is there any other access to it? Can we open the eyes of the agency? So be good stewards of the land. Contact Corva. Contact me if there's an area that you really believe deserves access. It has been closed for some reason. We will work on it. And just be aware of what's going on. The people who work in the agencies are not your enemy. Most of them are line officers. They're trying to earn a living. They dedicated themselves. There are those that will lead with either a political or a philosophical viewpoint that you may not agree with. And that's fine. You can be very nice to those people and kind of push them to the side a little bit. But when someone asks your opinion from an agency, don't go in with, I hate everything you do. It's all terrible. And all you want to do is close trails for OHV recreation. Go in with, this is why I do what I do. This is what I love. This is what we bring to the table. Off-roaders bring, in California, a lot of money to the table, to the tune of $30+ million a year in grants. No other recreation group brings money like that to the table for federal agencies, counties, cities, and nonprofits. The majority of it, 50%, goes for ground operations, 30% goes for restoration, and the rest is divided into law enforcement and to education and safety. But that 50% in ground operations, that's money that the agencies don't have. So know that. Know that you bring money to the table if you're an off-road representative. But reach out to other people in the area. Can you form coalitions? So we form coalition with hunters, with anglers, when we can, with backcountry horsemen. That's a little bit more difficult because they've now started working with the Wilderness Society. And if you're in a meeting where you have, which has often happened to me, with Sierra Club people, find a commonality. Go dressed as a regular person. Don't necessarily wear your off-road garb, but put on a regular shirt, so that you are not intimidating.
Wear tie-dye?
Well, just be a regular person.
Right.
Just it never hurts to be more professional than even the opportunity might require. It never hurts because then people take you seriously.
Right, but man, it's hard sometimes.
It is really hard. But as I was telling a friend of mine the other day, we have a gentleman on the board, Bruce Switcher, who's been VP of Land Use and Public Policy for a long time in Corva. And I'm happy to say he got to know Randy, and we started working to educate off-roaders at about the same time in 2005 and 2006. And I've had people in federal agencies and in state agencies and state parks quote what he has said, because it made so much sense. I have not had them quote. I've had them complain about what other people might have said.
Right.
But who are they listening to in this? They're listening to Bruce, so they can quote him. Now, he is a doctor. He doesn't use doctor when he's off road. He's an oral surgeon and he's very well educated, but in his heart, he's a gearhead. And this is what he loves to do, and that's why he fights for it. So if you realize you're going to get more by being professional um, and putting your best foot forward, or if you don't feel like you can do that, if you're just too emotionally attached, call me. Call us. This is what we do. This is my life. I probably know the people that you're involved with. In some cases I do, some cases I don't, but I'll make it my job to find out, because my goal now moving forward, before I would say 2010 to 2020, it was about making sure that trails didn't close. And starting in about 2022, now the goal is reopening trails, creating more access, creating more loop opportunities, reopening campgrounds. And because I believe we can, working together. What I don't get is all the people who say they care about trails. Pick 2 or 3 organizations and belong to them. Hopefully one of those is CORVA. We're working very hard for all off-roaders, but I have to put that in there. There are some great organizations, and I particularly appreciate Tread Lightly. And I have to say, the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame, what they're doing is saving our history and saving the memories and the lessons that the people who created us, who brought us to the forefront, everything that they brought to the table. They're bringing it, you and the board of directors, and I'm not saying this because I want to butter you up, but the importance of it is it brings back lessons of things that we learned before that we may have forgotten.
Right.
So it's really important, and besides being fun.
True.
But I think we can, working together. We need more money. We need more manpower. I don't know an organization in the state that can't say that. But the people who are doing this, like me, we're not doing it to become rich and famous. We're doing it because we believe in what we're doing. And I'm extraordinarily lucky to have the support of an organization that I wholeheartedly believe in behind me, because I couldn't do it, and the support of my family and my husband. It's key, because there's a lot of late nights and a lot of work, a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings. You may not accomplish something the first time, but there are things like the Sustainable Outdoor Recreation Collaborative of the Forest Service. Most people don't even know it exists. I'm on the steering committee. My goal is to make sure OHV recreation is considered in every capacity that the Forest Service decides that what is sustainability. That includes off-road recreation. And believe it or not, we got it into the charter with the agreement of the Wilderness Society.
Wow, that's excellent.
So it's not, sustainability in the Forest Service is not defined by form of recreation. It's defined by the management and the mitigation that takes place on the ground. And that's huge. Nobody really knows about it, but
right.
It will define in the future where how opportunities are defined, and where off-road recreation, where it hits. So now we're just like hiking or biking, another form of recreation. Oh, okay. Everybody has an impact on the ground. All forms of recreation need to be managed. Now, if we can get that definition in the Pacific Northwest, for example, in all the other regions of the Forest Service, we would be achieving something. And I'd very much like to see that happen, because it means from the get-go, OHV recreation isn't considered as an other.
Right.
It's just there, just something we do.
Well, Amy, I'd like to reach out to say to everybody that take Amy up on her offer. if you're frustrated with what's going on in your neighborhood, I'll put it as neighborhood, but in your area, the places that you go with the way things are being done, and you're not sure how to approach things, talk to Amy. She's level-headed, much more so than I would ever be. And that's why I have to reach out to people, because I have a tendency to stomp my feet and maybe be unprofessional, and people don't want to hear that. So, it's great that we have people on the ground that are helping OHV access, whether it's keeping things from closing or reopening things after they've been closed, like yourself, Amy. Thank you so much for what you and CORVA and the other organizations that you guys work with have done to help keep this thing alive that we love to do.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm not stopping till I've got a foot in the ground or 2 feet in the ground.
Right.
This is, I found my niche, my goal in life, and I think I'm very lucky to have found that, because people go through sometimes kind of endlessly, but you found yours, I found mine. It's very, very rewarding in its own way. Can be frustrating, but I love our community.
Right. And I hope what I can bring to all this is kind of that person in the middle between the everyday OHVer that doesn't know anything about the land use opportunities or what's going on that side, and the land use people like yourself that really want to reach those everyday users that don't listen. So I hope that myself and some others that are in, kind of in the position that I am, can kind of help with that transition. So, I'm not always, like I said, I can't help but stomp my feet sometimes, but maybe I can stomp them in the right way to.
Yeah, just said, my number's everywhere. My phone number's everywhere. My favorite thing is to really needle the Sierra Club. Hate to say it, but they needled me when I became disabled. I'm giving it back.
Perfect.
And my favorite thing is really to put pins in their arguments. You have to know your stuff. You got to know about soil management. You have to know about the impact of equestrian use, 4,000 pounds a square foot pressure from every hoof that goes in the ground. You have to know those arguments in order to do that. But if the figurative, the greater you out there can't do it, I can.
Perfect. Well, Amy, I want to say thank you for spending the time and educating, and I hope that more people will take you up on your offer to listen to them and to help them with their needs. So with that, have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to see you again. We'll continue on this conversation that we started a couple of years ago at a gala for Ormhoff, and we've just kind of expanded it over time.
Sounds great.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Well, that's another episode of Conversations with Big Rich. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review on any podcast service that you happen to be listening on, or send us an email or a text message or a Facebook message, and let me know any ideas that you have, or if there's anybody that you have that you think would be a great guest, please forward the contact information to me so that we can try to get them on. And always remember, live life to the fullest. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and live life with all the gusto you can. Thank you.